Lecture 16, we're going to continue talking about biological processes in the soils, and we're going to get specifically into how they relate to plant nutrition. Now this lecture right here is it's made up really of two class lectures, so this is going to count as two. So a little bit of summary here. We've talked about deposition and decomposition, how things are taken up by plants, the plants decompose, and then when those materials decompose, we get depositions in the soil of different nutrients. There's also transfers, so we have movement of nutrients around, but also we have some transformations. Now the soil microbes, they kind of control some of these transformations, and they also influence many plant nutrients. Okay, and the big ones are nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and then the micronutrients copper, boron, iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. And as we've talked about previously, they also are important in mediating transformations within the carbon cycle. So remember that microbes are the big workers when we talk about carbon in the environment and carbon transformations. So this lecture is going to go through a lot of definitions and names, and all these are really important, and I want you guys to memorize these and what they are. Okay, the first things that we're going to talk about are mineralization and immobilization. Okay, and basically this little diagram right here is kind of showing this relationship with nitrogen. Okay, and actually mineralization and immobilization occur with other elements as well. It occurs with sulfur and phosphorus and others. And basically what happens is what mineralization is as you can see right here, mineralization is we take something that is alive, or in other words an organic form, and through the soil microfauna and microflora, these bodies are then converted into inorganic nutrients. In this case, the example is ammonium and nitrate. Now, this process can go the other way. We can get ammonium and nitrate that is immobilized, meaning that these bugs and critters and soil organisms have started to eat on this ammonium and nitrate and have thus put it into their bodies. And the terms mineralization and immobilization are in the sense of a plant growing in the system. Okay, if ammonium and nitrate are immobilized into a bug or a plant or a worm, that means that it is unavailable for a plant to use. Whereas if one of those bugs dies or the bacteria die and they give off ammonium and nitrate, those are two forms of nitrogen that the plant can use. So organisms, they can consume other organisms, and in the process they'll excrete this ammonium and nitrate. Okay, these are then usable by the plant. Organisms can also take up these inorganic nutrients and use them for themselves as they grow, and then they're stored in their bodies and other organic forms. Okay, mineralization and immobilization. So for the standpoint of a plant, mineralization is preferred, because by that process the two available forms of nitrogen in this case are made available to them. On the opposite hand, for a plant, immobilization is bad. That means that the organisms have taken these inorganic nutrients that the plant uses and consumes them into their bodies. So those two terms are in the sense of how a plant would see this. Now, you can go on the internet and you can go online and look, and there are several different schematics showing specifically the nitrogen cycle. And this is kind of where I wanted to start today, was talking about the nitrogen cycle. Okay, in the atmosphere, you guys may or may not know, but 72% of our atmosphere is actually nitrogen gas. And so, as you can imagine, there's a huge cycle in the environment of nitrogen. Okay, and what can happen is that nitrogen gas can be fixed into the soil to be used by plants. It can be put into the soil by animal or human involvement. Okay, and it's generally in the form of nitrate, nitrite, and ammonium. However, those things being in the soil, there is means for loss. So these things can be taken up by organisms, and so what you see right here is that the nitrate or ammonium is taken up by a plant. Okay, these can also leach out, or another process is called denitrification, where in anaerobic conditions, meaning there's no air, the nitrate is converted to nitrite, and then it's actually converted to nitrogen gas through the process of denitrification. So, like I said, if you ever get a spare minute, look up the nitrogen cycle and do a Google search on it, and there's hundreds and hundreds of different schematics for the nitrogen cycle. This is one of them. Here's another one. This one's much more complicated, but there's a few things that you guys already know about that we can pick out here. Okay, first of all, up here we've got this big pool of nitrogen gas that's in the atmosphere. Okay, that can either be fixed into the soil by some sort of a symbiosis. It can be added as fertilizer. It can be added through animals. And what you see here is this whole process. Okay, we've got mineralization. Remember that mineralization is the conversion from an organic form right here into an inorganic form, such as ammonium or nitrate. Okay, and the opposite is true too. So down here, where you've got nitrate or ammonium converted back to organic matter, it's showing it right here, immobilization. So this is one of the processes of immobilization, where nitrate is converted back to soil organic matter. Now, even for me, this schematic here is a little bit complicated. So what I have done is, using my best art skills, I have devised my own nitrogen cycle. Okay, and the way this works is basically like this. Again, we've got nitrogen gas in the atmosphere, okay? And that nitrogen gas can be fixed into organic N. Okay, this is nitrogen that exists in plant materials, and this is done by legumes, okay? And we'll talk about legumes in a little bit more detail here in a minute. But just remember that this conversion from nitrogen gas into organic N can occur by legumes. Okay, we can also take atmospheric N and we get manure that's produced out of it. We get plant residues, but also there's a process where we can create fertilizer. Okay, and that fertilizer can be added either as ammonium or it can be added as nitrate. Okay. A few things to remember here. This organic N pool, this is mostly in, dead, dying, and living organisms in the soil. Okay, this is a pool that the plant cannot use. And so what happens is this organic N, through a few steps, can convert itself. Okay, the first step of organic N conversion in the soil is called ammonification. Okay, and what that means is that organic N is converted to ammonium. And this is done by the microorganisms in the soil. What those microorganisms do is they munch on this organic N, and after they've munched on it, they excrete it, and in that process they create this ammonium. Okay? The next step is actually a two-part process. Most of our soils around in our state are fairly warm, they're well aerated, they're fairly moist, and these conditions favor what we call this process right here of nitrification. Okay, and nitrification is a two-step process, and again, this is done by soil microorganisms where ammonium is first converted into nitrite by these little bugs called Nitrosomonas, and then from nitrite to nitrate by a group of organisms called Nitrobacter. Okay, so this two-step process from ammonium to nitrate is called nitrification. And remember, our soils favor this reaction, and so we don't tend to have a lot of ammonium in our soils because when we add ammonium as fertilizer, it usually converts to nitrate very rapidly. Okay? Now, remember that conversion from an organic N source to either ammonium or nitrate is called mineralization. Okay? If you go backwards and you go from either nitrate or ammonium into organic N, so this is, let's say a plant takes up nitrate or ammonium and assimilates it into his body, that process is called immobilization. Okay? Another interesting tidbit is that lightning strikes are actually a form of nitrogen fixation. And so what this does is it takes nitrogen out of the air and deposits it in the soil as either ammonium or nitrate. So this doesn't account for a lot of soil N, but it is a little bit. Okay, let's talk about ammonium and nitrate a little bit more in detail here. So ammonium, this right here is a cation, remember? Well, if this thing converts to NH3, so if you go from NH4 to NH3, NH3 is a gas, okay? In a process where NH4 is converted to NH3 and then is lost to the atmosphere is what we call volatilization. Okay, you can think of this ammonium as turning into a gas and volatilizing off into the atmosphere. Nitrate, on the other hand, this is an anion, and remember, in the soil we tend to have a cation exchange capacity, and because our soil colloids are negatively charged, there's actually a repulsion for nitrate in the soil. That being the case, nitrate has a real tendency to leach. And so you'll hear nitrate, and you'll hear about nitrate leaching and getting into the groundwater, and that's really bad because it causes problems. But you now know the reason that nitrate leaches is because in the soil it exists as a negatively charged anion, and it doesn't tend to stick to soil particles. Ammonium, on the other hand, this is positively charged. It will bind to those clay particles. Okay? So there's a few different fates. Okay? Ammonium can either be converted to nitrate, okay, through the process of nitrification. Ammonium can volatilize and be lost to the atmosphere. Ammonium can be taken up by a plant. That's what I'm trying to show you right here is a plant takes that up, and this is actually then recycled into this pool of organic N. And so those are the different pathways that ammonium can undergo. Okay, and ammonium, remember, can either be applied as a manure or a fertilizer or a plant residue. Nitrate, it has some paths for loss too. Okay, it can leach, It can immobilize, meaning it can be taken up by a plant, converted to organic nitrogen, and fall back into this organic N pool. Or in anaerobic conditions, it can denitrify, okay? And what those organisms do is they change it from nitrate to NOx or nitrous oxide, two different gases. So if you want to spend any time memorizing anything, this is the thing to memorize. Memorize what the processes are, what the names mean, and what the different fates of the different nitrogen pools are. Okay, so let me give you some more definitions, maybe as review. First of all is fixation, okay? And remember what fixation is. This is where we convert atmospheric nitrogen to some form of soil nitrogen, and that can be either an organic nitrogen pool or an inorganic nitrogen pool. And this is done mostly by nitrogen fixing bacteria or lightning, okay? Now, mineralization. Remember what this is. Mineralization is the conversion of organic N to inorganic N. And again, this process is mediated by soil microbes, okay? And so what these do, these microbes, remember what saprophyte means? These are the opportunistic microbes. What they'll do is they'll go in and eat organic matter, and in that process they'll release ammonium and nitrate, okay? And remember, these are the two forms of plant available nitrogen, okay? A plant doesn't take up any other form of nitrogen other than ammonium and nitrate. Okay, so down here, this is the process. Conversion of organic N by bacteria, fungi, and etc. into either nitrate or ammonium. And then specifically, when we get conversion of organic nitrogen to ammonium, this process is called ammonification. We usually do not get a direct conversion from, well, I guess we can. We can get a conversion from organic N to nitrate, but remember that is not called nitrification. Nitrification is solely the conversion from ammonium to nitrate. Now, humans have figured out how to do this artificially. There's a process called the Haber-Bosch process, and what we do is we take atmospheric nitrogen, and using heat and a lot of pressure, we can produce ammonia, this NH3 right here. And from that NH3, we can then produce products that are either ammonium or nitrate or some combination of the two. Okay, this is another review. Immobilization. Okay, this is the exact opposite of mineralization. What this means is that plants or microbes, what they do is they take the ammonium or nitrate that's in the soil and available to plants, and they assimilate it into their bodies, and so they immobilize it, making it unavailable to a plant. Okay, nitrification. This is done by different microbes, and this is the conversion, you'll remember, from ammonium to nitrate, and it's two steps. Excuse me. The first step is we start with ammonium, and with the Nitrosomonas bacteria, this ammonium is converted first into nitrite. That nitrite is then converted to nitrate via the Nitrobacter. Okay? This two-step process is called nitrification. And again, this is something that's favored in our soils. Our soils are warm, they're moist, they're well aerated, And so because of that, the Nitrosomonas and the Nitrobacter are very effective at converting soil ammonium to nitrate. Volatilization. Okay, this is the conversion of ammonium, which is the NH4, to ammonia, which is NH3. And this is released as a gas. Okay, and there's really a huge potential loss because many of our fertilizers are applied as ammonium forms of nitrogen. And so there's only one step that has to happen in order to gas that stuff off. We have to lose one of those hydrogen ions, and we're left with ammonia gas. Huge potential for loss. Okay, nitrate leaching. Okay, again, this nitrate leaches due to its negative charge, and this is bad when it gets into the groundwater. Denitrification. This occurs when soils become waterlogged, and anaerobic microorganisms will convert nitrate into either nitrous oxide or some other NOx. X stands for some other formulation gas. Okay, and these are kind of bad gases. They're not really something that you'd want to be releasing into the atmosphere on purpose. And so by maintaining soils, or not letting them become waterlogged, you'll prevent a lot of this. Okay, this means that the nitrogen that maybe you applied as fertilizer escapes into the atmosphere, and that's bad because you don't want to lose your nitrogen. And also that nitrogen, as either nitrous oxide or some other form, is then a greenhouse gas. So this is doubly bad. Now, depending on soil conditions, there are some processes that will or will not happen. If you look up here on the top left, let's say hypothetically that our soil is really cold, okay? And so maybe we have a plant here that's taking up nitrate, and it's producing litter and a pool of organic nitrogen right here. What happens is, in order to convert this organic nitrogen pool into either ammonium or nitrate, it kind of stops, okay? And cold conditions are not really favored by the bacteria and microorganisms that do their job of converting organic nitrogen into inorganic nitrogen or mineralizing it. And so we don't tend to get a lot of this formation. This is why soils that are cold have a higher potential of producing more organic matter than warm soils, because they don't break down the organic nitrogen pool nearly as quickly. Okay? What if things are really hot? Okay? This figure on the right is showing what happens if things are really hot. What happens is we have our plants that are taking up nitrogen. They create a litter, and that turns into this organic end pool. They call it humus here. Now, because things are warm, those bacteria are going like gangbusters, okay? And so we're getting a lot of this mineralization, conversion from organic N into these inorganic N forms, okay? And so this is a go, go, go all the time. And so we don't tend to have a huge pool of organic nitrogen here. Okay, if things are really dry, we might have litter and organic N, and because it's probably hot too, we get a lot of conversion from ammonium into nitrate. But because the plants aren't growing terribly well, it kind of stops the plant production, and so we don't have a big pool of litter or organic N here. Conversely, if things are wet, okay, we tend to have a lot of plant growth, may or may not have a lot of litter and organic N, but because things are wet, the plants tend to take up a lot of nitrate, okay? And so there's a lot of nitrate cycling through this system. In the case of a waterlogged condition, again, we get this process where we convert plant tissue to organic N, and it's kind of a slow conversion into these inorganic N pools of ammonium and nitrate. But because they're waterlogged, what we get is probably denitrification, and that kind of creates a stop in our nitrogen cycle here. So very important not to let things get waterlogged. Okay, so we need to talk about a few oxidation reactions. Okay, now in chemistry we talk about generally we talk about two forms of reactions. There's oxidation reactions, and there are reduction reactions. Simply put, these are defined by how many electrons are gained or lost. And for me, the easiest way to keep track of this thing is to keep track of oxygen. Okay? If something is being oxidized, in most cases it's gaining oxygen. Okay? And so in our first example up here, nitrification, what we do is we're going from ammonium to nitrate. Remember, the bacteria do this, Nitrosomonas, and then the nitrobacter converted into nitrate. So along this path, we've started with no oxygen right here, and here we have 2 oxygens, and here we have 3. So in comparing this ammonium form of nitrogen and the nitrate form of nitrogen, you would say that the nitrate form is the most oxidized. Okay? The opposite of that, okay, is to say that the ammonium form of nitrogen is more reduced than the nitrate form. Sulfur undergoes oxidation. So let's say you put out, this is hydrogen sulfide. You might recognize this as a rotten egg smell. Okay, as this compound right here is oxidized, we start out with H2S, it converts to just sulfur, and then right here, this is called sulfite, SO2. But you can see that this is the oxidized form, and this is the reduced form. Same thing with iron, okay? Check out the oxygens right here. This is the oxidized form, this is the reduced form, and so on with manganese. Okay, let's go the other way. Okay, for manganese, if we start with this compound right here and go backwards, notice that we've lost oxygen, and so that means that this compound now is in a reduced state. Same with iron, conversion of nitrate to N2O or N2. This is a process of denitrification. Okay, but look, we're losing oxygen along the way, and so these are more reduced forms. Right here, we're going from sulfate to this hydrogen sulfide. This is a reduction reaction. The same thing happens with methane. Okay, this is a hydroxide of methane, and this is just plain old methane gas. And this is the more reduced form because it does not have oxygen with it. And in the soil, what we're learning about today is, just remember that denitrification is a process of reduction and not oxidation. Okay, carbon to nitrogen ratio. I think we talked about this a little bit in the last lecture. Remember that the quality of the residue that we're applying to the soil determines in large part the process that it undergoes. And the rule is that microbes eat first. Okay? If you put a material out that has a lot of carbon in it, what happens is the microbes have to scavenge in the soil to keep their diet in balance. And this is called immobilization. So they're taking nitrate or ammonium in the soil and using it in their bodies. And this means that plants cannot use that nitrate or ammonium for themselves. And here's kind of a general rule of thumb. If the carbon to nitrogen ratio is greater than 25 to 1, meaning we have a lot more carbon than nitrogen, then we're going to get immobilization. If the carbon to nitrogen ratio is less than 25 to 1, then we'll get a mineralization, meaning that the microbes will break down that organic matter and release ammonium and nitrate, the two inorganic plant available forms of nitrogen, into the soil. And so this is an important consideration when applying organic amendments. If you're applying a manure, you probably have a very low C to N ratio. If you're applying like a mulch or a compost or straw, these things tend to be high in carbon to nitrogen ratio. And because of that, you need to realize that you can rob your plants of nitrogen if you're putting too much carbon out on the soil. Here's just an example of something that you might see in the field. Okay, what you're looking at here is a wheat field, and these plots right here, you see this plot right here where things are looking really weak, right around here. What happened is these plots that were green, they put on a little bit of extra fertilizer to keep that carbon to nitrogen ratio low, and by so doing, they didn't starve their plants of nitrogen. What's going on right here in these plots is that the carbon to nitrogen ratio of wheat tends to be fairly high. And if there's not a lot of nitrogen in the soil, the microbes are going to steal it. And you can see that they've stolen it here. The plants aren't taking it up and aren't growing as well as these plants where they've added nitrogen as fertilizer. This is a fantastic demonstration of the implications of not balancing your carbon to nitrogen ratio correctly. Okay, let's talk about a little bit more about biology and how they enhance plant growth. Okay, there's a few things that I want to talk about here. Fungi. Okay, there's a type of fungi called mycorrhizae. Okay, if you split this word into two, myco, the first part of the word, stands for fungus, and rhizae means root. Okay, and so basically what this is it is a fungus that actually can attach to the root of a plant and itself acts as a root. Okay, it's not technically part of the plant, but what it does is those mycorrhizae, they get into the plant root and they start using the plant roots, for carbohydrates and energy. They're kind of sucking out of the plant. However, this is beneficial to the plant because what the mycorrhizae do is they're able to effectively extend the rooting area of the plant, and they're able to take up nutrients and feed them back into the plant. Okay, that's mycorrhizae. A few bacteria that are important in soil biology are the bacteria that are responsible for nitrogen fixation. Okay, and these are what we call rhizobium. And what these rhizobium do is kind of similar to the mycorrhizae. They get into the plant, and what they actually do is they infect the plant, and the root kind of grows around this rhizobium right here. But the benefit here for the plant is that the rhizobium are able to take N2 out of the atmosphere and convert it into organic N. And that's important because that organic N pool, once it's in the soil, can then be converted into either ammonium or nitrate using other bacteria and fungi. So this is an important thing. Now, these two things right here, this association what they have with plants is called symbiosis. Okay, what symbiosis means is that in this case both parties, meaning the fungi or bacteria and the plants, are benefiting. Okay? In the case of mycorrhizae, the fungi are benefiting because they're able to suck off nutrients from the plant and use its energy, but in turn they're supplying the plant with other nutrients. Okay, in the case of the rhizobium, what they're doing is they're infecting the plant and again using the plant's carbohydrates and energy, but in turn they're fixing atmospheric nitrogen and it puts it into the plant and use it in a form that it can use. Okay, there's another type of microbe called actinomycetes, and actinomycetes are interesting. These are what give the soil its earthy smell, and in some cases they are responsible for biological end fixation, similarly to what the rhizobium do. And there's a certain species of actinomycetes called Frankia that are responsible for that biological end fixation. So here's a close-up of some mycorrhizae. What you see here on the top is a plant root, and what's happened here is you see these little tiny strands right here. Those are not root hairs. What those are mycorrhizae. They're these fungi that have embedded themselves into the root, but then have extended the rooting zone for this plant, and they're able to suck in water and nutrients through that fungi. And here's an uber close-up look at a mycorrhizae filament. Back to rhizobia for a minute. Now, there's several different species and subgroups of mycorrhizae, and they're plant specific. Okay, now the one that we're probably most familiar with is let's see if I can find it here. These are all legumes. Okay, so common legumes that we have. There's lentils, there's peas, clovers are legumes. Alfalfa is a legume. Okay, and all of these different beans are legumes. There's certain trees that are legumes too. Each one has a specific rhizobium that it likes to make an association with. So in the case of alfalfa, it likes to make an association with this Mililote subgroup of rhizobium. Okay. There's a different type of rhizobium called bradyrhizobium. These are the kinds that we find in soybeans and in peanuts. And then there's also this other type of rhizobium. I don't know very much about it, but it's found in these Sebastian trees. I can't even say Hispania trees. Anyhow, just remember that each plant likes to have its own specific type of rhizobium in order to survive. So beans, they have this rhizobium called Phaseoli, Mililote for alfalfa, and then peas and lentils have a different type of rhizobium altogether. Okay, so symbiosis. Okay, this is the fixation of atmospheric N into the plant. Okay, and this happens in it can happen in non-legumes as well as legumes, but legumes are more common. Okay, and so I'm going to kind of ignore these first 2 points up here. It can happen in non-legume plants, but it's less common. What I really want to talk about is, in fact, I just want to skip this slide altogether because most of what I want to talk about is symbiotic. There are some non-symbiotic nitrogen fixers as well. And so these bacteria are able to fix quite a bit of nitrogen. Okay, look at alfalfa right here. what you're looking at here, this is the kilograms of N per hectare per year. So this is almost the same as pounds per acre per year. Alfalfa can fix upwards of 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. That's quite a bit. Beans are quite a bit less, maybe 30 to 50 pounds. And so anyway, you can see that when you have a legume, they're able to fix quite a bit of nitrogen. Here's a close-up of mycorrhizae. There's different types. There's this type we call VAM, which is vesicular arbuscular mycorrhizae. Okay, these kind of form around the outside of the root. Okay, there's other types that actually penetrate the root. And then these little guys, these little strings are called hyphae. Okay, and these hyphae are what branch out and spread the root zone around. Okay, nodules. The next chance you guys get, I want you to go out and find an alfalfa field and with a shovel dig up the alfalfa and shake off the roots really well. And what you should be able to find is these nodules. And what these nodules are is that they're an indicator that some type of rhizobium has infected this root. And when the root becomes infected, it grows this nodule around the bacteria. Okay? But once that bacteria is in there, it's able to then take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and put it in a form that the plant can use. Okay, so fungi and bacteria have different roles in the soil. They both are important in decomposing organic matter. They improve organic matter accumulation and can help retaining nutrients. We talked about mycorrhizae. Those mycorrhizae, in addition to supplying food for the plant, they kind of act like a glue in the soil, and so you can get some improvement in soil structure. And even some of them can compete with plant pathogens. Let's talk about sulfur here for a little bit. Believe it or not, sulfur and nitrogen are actually kind of close cousins in the soil. They behave a lot the same. And so there's three main pools of sulfur in the soil system. And they are organic matter, there's some in the soil minerals, and lastly there's some in gases in the atmosphere. And in most ecosystems, sulfur that's taken up by plants is usually returned back to the system. Okay, and so these three sources usually supply maybe 5 to 20 kilograms of sulfur per hectare. That's about 7 to 25 pounds of sulfur per acre per year that you can expect to get back by growing plants. Sulfur in what you're looking at here is a soil profile. Okay, so here you have the soil surface, and we're moving down the profile. And what you're looking at down here is sulfur concentration. So typically in most soils, you'll have a high concentration of organic sulfur towards the top. And this is in a mollisol. You'll remember that a mollisol is kind of a prairie type soil. Okay, a fair amount of organic matter. This smaller sliver over here, this is our inorganic sulfur realm. Sulfur, like nitrate, is negatively charged, and so up at the top of the profile we don't tend to have a lot of sulfur because a lot of it is being leached down the profile. In a spodosol, this is a completely different beast. Okay, we've got tons of organic sulfur, especially at the top. Okay, this is probably our O horizon right here. Okay, and you'll remember in a spodosol we transition from an O horizon into an E. Okay, and this little blip right here is our E horizon, or our zone of eluviation. Okay, and so these sulfur compounds are probably moving quickly out of there and then redepositing in our B horizon down here. Now in an oxisol, this is a soil that's been really highly weathered, okay, and so most of our organic sulfur has been converted into an inorganic form. Now you'll remember that that conversion from organic to inorganic is called mineralization. Same thing with sulfur. Nitrogen mineralizes, but sulfur does also. And so what you've got here is organic sulfur that has mineralized into an inorganic sulfur pool. We've got a higher concentration as we move down the profile because of leaching. So there's a few major transformations that the soil undergoes. You can check this figure out in your book. But basically what we have are sulfides, sulfates, organic and elemental sulfur. The form that plants use is right here, sulfates. This is SO4 minus. Okay. Here's the diagram right here. A confusing one at that. But you'll notice that this is quite similar to the nitrogen cycle, okay? We've got sulfate right here. This is our plant available form. Negatively charged, so look, we get leaching, okay? We've got conversion of soil organic matter into sulfate, and no surprise that that process is called mineralization. So again, very, very similar processes as to what happens with nitrogen in the soil. This graph right here is showing kind of the life cycle of how sulfur might behave in the soil. So what you're looking at on this y-axis right here is the sulfate concentration in the soil, and we're tracking this over time. Okay, and what this is showing us is that right here we have a sulfur application, and they applied this as either elemental sulfur, which is this dashed line, or calcium sulfate, which is more of a soluble form of sulfur. And what happens is over the summer the concentration tends to go down, okay, and this is going down in January, March, May, July. This is when the plant is doing most of its growing, okay, and so the concentration is going down because the plant is taking this up or immobilizing it into its body. Now if you jump over here into the fall, as the plants start dying and returning its organic matter back into the soil, again we kind of see a bump in sulfur numbers in both cases, okay? Now one thing to point out here, this dashed line is elemental sulfur, okay? Remember, a plant uses only the sulfate form of sulfur, and because this was applied as elemental sulfur, it has to oxidize, and the only way that happens is the same as with nitrogen. It has to be microbially mediated. So this elemental sulfur that's applied, the microbes have to break it down, and so we don't get a big bump like we do right here in our soil concentration when we've added something soluble. It takes time, and finally over here it's starting to be oxidized. So if you apply sulfur as elemental sulfur, you have to keep in mind that it's going to take some time in order to get the soil fertility that you want out of that elemental sulfur. Okay, we've talked about oxidation and reduction processes. Remember, oxidation means that you go, for example, from elemental sulfur into a sulfate form. And the exact opposite of that is reduction, where you go from a sulfate form back to like an elemental sulfur form. The sulfate can adsorb to clay particles. It can be leached, and so sulfur is an important element that we have to maintain in our soil fertility. Here's a picture of a road cut. What this road cut is showing is that we had a excuse me, we had a layer right here of sulfur in the soil, and now that this has been exposed to the surface and water and rain and stuff like that, what happens is once the water passes through that, it creates sulfuric acid, and you'll notice that down here it's really being difficult for plants to grow. And so we probably have a really low pH right here and a lot of sulfuric acid buildup. Okay, that's it for this lecture. The next lecture that we're going to start talking about soil fertility and plant nutrition.